That giant eye is insane. Drop a PayPal tip, let's dive in.
Previously, our Saiyan gods crashed into the shinobi world, stripping their divine powers to settle a petty rivalry. They split the legendary ninja founders into two teams, betting entirely on who was the ultimate master of combat. Goku taught the absolute art of pure, relaxed instinct, letting the body flow flawlessly like a calm river. While Vegeta forged absolute iron shields, brutally forcing his disciples to absorb catastrophic damage without ever flinching. But a single, catastrophic sneeze sent everyone crashing straight into the enraged Hokage's highly private hot spring. Now, barely surviving the absolute chaos, both battered teams finally reunite under the warm glow of the ramen stand. But this peaceful, much-needed intermission is violently cut short as the very fabric of reality begins to scream. The beautiful night sky abruptly shatters like fragile glass, completely exposing a terrifying, multidimensional void hiding above. A colossal Sharingan eye awakens in the cosmic abyss, acting as the ultimate, unforgiving planetary immune system. It instantly scans the fractured timeline, locking its terrifying gaze directly onto the foreign god ki radiating from the Saiyans. Identifying Goku and Vegeta as lethal cosmic viruses, the planet aggressively triggers its absolute quarantine protocol. A localized black hole erupts. The physical world is violently vaporized, erasing every single irrelevant detail from existence. The wooden shop and the very ground itself completely dissolve into dust, leaving only our 6 targets suspended. An impossible gravitational pull aggressively drags the warriors upward, stripping away their ability to control their own movements. Goku desperately tries to ignite his aura, but the Planetary will instantly suffocate his legendary energy reserves. Even the Prince of Saiyans is rendered completely helpless, his royal pride utterly crushed by the absolute cosmic pressure. The Uchiha prodigies attempt to cast their visual prowess, but the overwhelming dimensional gravity violently forces their eyes shut. Meanwhile, the legendary Hokages are tossed around like weightless ragdolls, completely incapable of utilizing their massive chakra. The colossal eye pulses with a furious red light, tightening its inescapable grip around the cosmic intruders.
Whoa! This giant eyeball is sucking the gravity right out of us! Shut up, Kakarot! This absolute mess is entirely your fault!
A blinding, jagged rift violently tears open behind them, revealing the terrifying entrance to the planetary quarantine zone. Unable to resist, the 6 warriors are violently sucked into the glowing abyss, completely vanishing from the timeline. The dimensional rift aggressively snaps shut. The giant eye silently oversees the empty void, finalizing the cosmic isolation. The cosmic glitch spits Goku and the 2 Uchiha legends straight into a suffocating, blood-red wasteland. They violently slam into the dunes, instantly crushed by a gravitational field 1,000 times heavier than normal. The quarantine zone actively suppresses their physical existence, turning their own body weight into a lethal weapon against them. But for a Saiyan raised on high-gravity training, this oppressive environment is absolutely nothing more than a light warm-up. Recognizing the invaders, the blood-red desert violently awakens, actively mobilizing its immune response to crush the intruders. Tens of thousands of faceless, jagged sand golems rise from the dunes, forming a terrifying, impenetrable execution squad. The mindless titans strike instantly, launching a coordinated, lethal assault aimed directly at the exhausted ninja legends. Conditioned by Vegeta's iron discipline, the young prodigy completely refuses to evade, aggressively bracing his fragile muscles for impact. But without a Saiyan's indestructible durability, tanking a catastrophic hit like that is absolute, undeniable suicide. The founder stubbornly mirrors the mistake, firmly anchoring his feet and absorbing catastrophic damage out of pure, twisted pride. Trapped by the prince's rigid teachings, the legendary ghost is brutally hammered down into the heavy, scorching dunes. Meanwhile, Goku effortlessly weaves through the chaos like water, completely baffled by their utterly self-destructive combat strategy. The endless swarm of titans converges relentlessly, threatening to permanently crush the 2 rigid warriors under absolute numbers. Bleeding and cornered, they refuse to adapt, choosing absolute physical agony over breaking their master's unforgiving rules.
Bro, what are you doing? Ugh! Stop flexing your muscles and just dodge the sand, you idiots!
Meanwhile, a violent crosscut reveals the prince and the 2 Hokages plunging directly into a suffocating, pitch-black nightmare. The dark swamp instantly awakens, unleashing colossal, parasitic roots desperate to drain the foreign energy from the intruders. Conditioned by Goku to be relaxed, Naruto clumsily attempts to flow with the attacks, but the toxic environment completely rejects his rhythm. The god of shinobi blocks a strike, only to realize in absolute horror that the parasitic vines are instantly devouring his massive chakra. But the Saiyan prince remains completely unfazed, violently shattering the parasitic roots with absolute, raw physical supremacy. Falling back on his oldest habits, Hashirama desperately attempts to absorb the surrounding nature energy to fuel a counterattack. But this is a quarantine zone. The Planetary will entirely rejects him, violently corrupting the natural energy into a lethal poison. The founder is brutally blasted backward, his absolute reliance on the environment immediately turning into his greatest weakness. Refusing to learn from the violent display, the stubborn knucklehead desperately attempts the exact same flawed strategy. The planetary immune system mercilessly rejects him as well, violently blasting the boy straight into the toxic muck. Stripped of their ability to borrow power from the earth, the two legendary heroes are instantly overwhelmed and cornered. The parasitic vines violently tighten their grip, mercilessly draining their life force into the unforgiving, toxic soil. Watching them completely crumble without their magical safety net, the prince's patience reaches its absolute, explosive limit. Completely out of options, the young hero desperately begs the cold-hearted prince for immediate salvation.
Stop begging the mud for help! If the planet hates you, crush it with your own damn fists!
The legendary Uchiha founders are brutally punished for their rigid defense, their bodies breaking under the crushing weight of their master's unforgiving iron discipline. Bleeding and exhausted, the ghost of the Uchiha stubbornly refuses to adapt, choosing absolute physical agony over strategic retreat. Meanwhile, completely unaffected by the extreme gravity, Goku prioritizes finishing his noodles over fighting the endless horde of sand monsters. His movements are entirely unconscious. He evades catastrophic, high-speed impacts with the weightless grace of a floating feather. The young prodigy watches in absolute disbelief, his rigid, battered body failing to comprehend the Saiyan's impossible fluidity. A moment of distraction instantly costs him. The sheer kinetic force shatters his rigid guard, tossing him across the scorching dunes. Finishing his meal, the universe's greatest martial artist finally decides to intervene in their pathetic, self-destructive combat strategy.
Stop flexing! Rigid muscles snap! Clear your head, kill your pride, and just let your body ride the killing intent.
Driven by boundless arrogance, the Uchiha ghost fiercely rejects the idea of surrendering his absolute control to mere instinct. His stubbornness is immediately punished as the relentless desert unleashes a devastating, synchronized execution strike from above. Facing absolute annihilation, the proud warrior finally lets go, completely relinquishing his rigid control in the very last microsecond. Tapping into the earliest stages of autonomous instinct, his battered body flawlessly weaves through the catastrophic impacts untouched. Witnessing the miracle, the young prodigy immediately follows suit, actively shedding Vegeta's iron armor to embrace the formless flow. Stripped of their visual prowess and rigid defense, the two Uchihas finally tap into the devastating beauty of absolute instinct. The universe's greatest defender beams with pride, having successfully planted the seeds of the gods into the darkest of hearts. Meanwhile, deep within the toxic swamp, the situation is absolutely dire as the legendary Hokages are slowly drained dry. Disgusted by their absolute helplessness, the prince violently intervenes, grabbing the parasitic vines with his bare, bleeding hands. Relying on absolutely nothing but raw, terrifying muscle, he forcefully shatters their wooden prison, throwing them to the toxic earth. Stripped of their divine connection to the earth, the two heroes are reduced to shivering, pathetic victims of the toxic environment. Towering over them like an unforgiving god, the prince aggressively rejects their despair, preparing to hammer his philosophy into their skulls.
If the planet rejects you, dominate it! Stop borrowing power, compress your own energy into a single point, and crush them!
The utterly selfish, dominant concept completely shatters their lifelong philosophy. To survive, they must abandon harmony and embrace absolute destruction. Denying them any time to think, the parasitic swamp aggressively renews its violent assault, aiming to finish the job entirely. Making a crucial choice, the knucklehead ninja fiercely rejects the earth, violently clenching his fists and relying entirely on himself. The founder follows suit, violently condensing his vast spiritual reserves into a single, terrifying point of pure, unadulterated physical density. Applying the royal philosophy, they unleash devastating physical strikes, completely obliterating the parasitic threats with their own condensed power. The sheer kinetic force forcefully clears the toxic sludge, replacing their pathetic despair with a fierce, highly aggressive arrogance. Watching the soft-hearted fools finally embrace their inner dominance, the Saiyan prince allows himself a rare, genuinely proud smirk. But the victory is entirely short-lived. Sensing the failure of its traps, the Planetary will violently shift its strategy. The exact same phenomenon violently tears through the blood desert, forcefully collapsing the walls of the isolated dimensions. Gravity violently inverts. The artificial landscapes are instantly erased, violently dragging the six warriors back into the absolute void. The dimensions aggressively merge into one. The planet is officially done playing games, preparing for an absolute, final execution. Suspended in the infinite white void, the two Uchihas finally let go of their immense pride, fully embracing Goku's formless philosophy. The Planetary will refuses to relent, aggressively summoning the heavy executioners from the desert to crush their newly found peace. Moving entirely on unconscious instinct, the young prodigy flows like water, effortlessly evading the lethal kinetic impact. Stripped of his magical armor, the legendary ghost finally achieves absolute physical liberation, rendering the overwhelming numbers entirely useless. The universe's greatest martial artist beams with pure satisfaction, witnessing the notoriously rigid ninjas finally embracing the formless flow. But the dimension is entirely merciless. It instantly summons the parasitic swamp, aiming to drain the remaining heroes completely dry. Refusing to be victims, the two Hokages aggressively weaponize their own egos, condensing their vast energy strictly into physical density. Applying Vegeta's ruthless philosophy, they unleash devastating kinetic strikes, completely obliterating the parasitic threats with absolute, raw power. The knucklehead ninja abandons his peaceful nature, aggressively dominating the hostile environment with an overwhelming display of pure violence. Witnessing the soft-hearted fools finally embrace their inner dominance, the Saiyan prince allows himself a rare, genuinely proud smirk. A perfect, beautiful symmetry is born. The rigid fighters become fluid water, while the peaceful monks become unbreakable iron. But the celebration is cut short. The universe's greatest defender instantly senses a catastrophic shift in the dimensional atmosphere. The prince drops his arrogance. The sheer, overwhelming density of the approaching threat demands their absolute, undivided attention. Realizing the isolated traps have completely failed, the Planetary will aggressively merge the hostile environments into one singular execution ground. A colossal avatar of pure planetary defense is born, its chest dominated by the terrifying, unforgiving eye of the quarantine.
Bro! The class swap actually worked. But that giant avatar looks absolutely terrifying, right?
The physical manifestation of the planet's wrath slowly raises its arms, exerting a crushing, suffocating pressure over the entire dimension. While their new techniques are flawless, the two Uchihas are absolutely running on empty, completely drained by the previous brutal onslaught. The two Hokages are equally devastated, their physical bodies pushed far past their absolute limits by the sheer, unadulterated violence. Recognizing their extreme vulnerability, the Planetary Executioner aggressively charges a catastrophic, final beam of pure, unfiltered destruction. Frozen by sheer exhaustion, the four legendary ninjas are left entirely defenseless against the impending, apocalyptic execution. Instantly dropping his smile, Goku violently lunges forward, fully intending to pull the students out of the fatal firing line. But the prince violently halts him. He shoots a terrifying glare, absolutely refusing to let Goku cheapen their final trial.
Don't you dare touch them, Kakarot! If you coddle them now, they will never truly evolve!
Wrestling with his protective instincts, Goku ultimately yields, choosing to absolutely trust his rival's incredibly dangerous, unyielding faith in the students. The Planetary Execution is violently triggered. A catastrophic beam of pure, unfiltered destruction rapidly descends upon the exhausted warriors. But the prince is entirely full of contradictions. Demanding their independence, he violently throws himself directly into the fatal trajectory. Refusing to use his own divine energy, he aggressively absorbs the apocalyptic blast using absolutely nothing but his raw, majestic flesh. He becomes an absolute, unbreakable iron shield, entirely nullifying the planetary wrath to protect the very students he just scolded. Burning in the lethal light, the ultimate Sundra refuses to yield, silently buying the crucial seconds needed for their final evolution. The Planetary will reaches its absolute boiling point, actively condensing the sheer wrath of the dimension into a singular, catastrophic execution beam. The sheer density of the gathered energy violently warps the space around it, promising absolute annihilation to anything caught in its path. Utterly drained by their miraculous evolution, the legendary ninjas are left entirely defenseless, unable to muster a single ounce of power to evade. The young Uchiha prodigy lowers his arms. Stripped of all options, he stubbornly chooses to face his execution with unbreakable pride. But the Saiyan prince refuses to let his hard work vanish. Abandoning his cold persona, he violently thrusts himself into the fray. The Planetary Execution is triggered. An apocalyptic wave of raw destruction aggressively descends to permanently erase the foreign threats. Moving with impossible, terrifying speed, the Royal Master forcefully throws his own body directly into the lethal firing line. Denying himself the luxury of an energy shield, he prepares to absorb the catastrophic planetary wrath entirely with his raw, indestructible flesh. The apocalyptic beam strikes with full force. But against the sheer density of a Saiyan, the destructive light violently shatters like fragile glass. The heat is excruciating, tearing at his skin. Yet, the stubborn prince fiercely holds his ground, turning his body into an absolute fortress. Sheltered perfectly within his massive shadow, the legendary ninjas witness the true, terrifying apex of the iron discipline they were just taught.
Don't you dare close your eyes! Watch closely, because a true king never bows to mere atmospheric pressure.
Roaring in defiance, he violently splits the apocalyptic wrath in half, demonstrating an unparalleled level of absolute, godly endurance. Trusting his rival completely with their lives, Goku seamlessly steps out from the shadows, fully prepared to execute his own divine philosophy. Bypassing brute force entirely, the martial arts genius raises his hand, completely abandoning all traces of aggressive killing intent. He summons the absolute pinnacle of his spiritual power. Not an energy designed to destroy, but a pure, unadulterated divine frequency. A breathtaking wave of pure warmth flows upward, carrying absolutely zero hostility as it directly intercepts the furious planetary entity. Upon contact, there is no explosion. The divine frequency effortlessly penetrates the core, directly interfacing with the planet's terrified consciousness.
Relax, big guy. We're not viruses, and we're not here to hurt your beautiful world. Just breathe.
The lethal execution beam abruptly ceases. The planet's frantic immune system is instantly overwhelmed by a profound, undeniable sense of cosmic peace. His absolute shield no longer needed, the prince finally drops his guard, his brutal, unyielding mission flawlessly executed. Deeply attuned to nature, the two Hokages are left utterly speechless, physically feeling the planet's massive panic instantly wash away. Cured of its cosmic fear, the hostile defense mechanism aggressively collapses. The massive, intimidating stone shell rapidly begins to fracture. But the trial isn't entirely over. The Uchiha prodigies instantly recognize the opening, their lethal instincts flaring back to life. Having perfectly softened the target, the master steps down, silently handing the final execution over to the evolving disciples. The prince mirrors the sentiment, his fierce, unspoken command demanding they completely obliterate the exposed weakness without a single ounce of mercy. The protective armor violently shatters. Stripped of its aggressive shell, the vulnerable core of the quarantine zone is finally, completely exposed. Reading the setup flawlessly, the four legendary warriors violently surge forward, fully prepared to deliver the absolute, final strike. Two completely opposing philosophies, masterfully woven together, have successfully forged an unstoppable, beautifully balanced force of nature. The stage is set. Blending absolute instinct with unyielding density, they prepare to shatter the final barrier of the cosmos. The final phase begins. The four disciples launch themselves forward, moving with absolute, perfect synchronization toward the blinding core. Desperate to survive, the planetary core unleashes a massive, chaotic barrage of lethal energy spikes to halt their advance. But Sasuke takes the vanguard. Closing his eyes, he fluidly weaves through the fatal lasers with absolute, effortless grace. Madara flawlessly follows, gently redirecting the massive incoming projectiles instead of blocking them, weaponizing the enemy's own momentum. Embracing the absolute art of softness, the two Uchihas effortlessly carve a perfectly clear path straight through the ultimate defense. Seizing the flawless opening, the two Hokages aggressively step up, ready to deliver the final, devastating physical judgment. Abandoning their magical nature entirely, they violently compress their massive life force strictly into raw, unadulterated physical density. They launch themselves through the gap, completely breaking the sound barrier as they rocket toward the exposed, glowing core. Applying Vegeta's ruthless discipline, they violently smash their fists directly into the fragile center of the planetary immune system. The sheer, catastrophic kinetic force completely bypasses all magical barriers, transferring a devastating physical shockwave deep into the core. A blinding network of deep, jagged cracks violently spreads across the glowing sphere, signifying the absolute end of the trial. The quarantine core catastrophically shatters into millions of glowing fragments, instantly neutralizing the dimension's aggressive hostility. Stripped of its panic, the terrifying physical manifestation of the planet peacefully crumbles into harmless, drifting dust. Only the massive planetary eye remains. It stares down at the warriors, actively processing the unimaginable outcome of the clash. The hostile red glare slowly washes out, replaced by a warm, peaceful blue light as the planet finally understands. Acknowledging them not as viruses, but as the ultimate antibodies, the colossal eye slowly and peacefully closes its heavy lid. The blinding infinite void instantly begins to dissolve, violently glitching as the dimension actively reconstructs the original physical timeline. The six warriors are instantly pulled backward, falling helplessly through a chaotic tunnel of bending light and restored reality. In the blink of an eye, they violently crash back down onto the wooden stools of the quiet ramen shop. The beautiful, starry night sky of the village remains perfectly intact, absolutely undisturbed by the terrifying cosmic chaos. The hot broth is still steaming. In the real world, absolutely zero time has passed since the dimensional rift opened. Naruto aggressively grips the counter, heavily panting as he physically processes the unimaginable scale of what they just survived. The first Hokage lets out a heavy chuckle, profoundly humbled by the terrifying, brutal limits of sheer physical endurance. Sasuke opens his eyes, his rigid posture entirely gone, flawlessly replaced by a deep, terrifyingly calm aura. The legendary ghost smirks quietly, having finally tasted the devastating, untouchable beauty of flowing, thoughtless martial arts. Goku takes a massive bite, shooting a highly approving, completely genuine grin directly at the two Uchiha prodigies. The Saiyan prince takes a slow sip, his dark eyes silently acknowledging the fierce, unbroken grit of the Hokages.
Man, that was a wild ride. I told you a little softness would make them way stronger, right? Don't push it, Kakarot. Those weaklings still have 1,000,000 years of grueling training ahead of them.
Despite the insults, a mutual, unspoken respect finally bridges the massive gap between the two completely opposing divine philosophies. As the universe's mightiest warriors peacefully finish their meal, the planet quietly rests, knowing its ultimate defense is now unbreakable.
That character arc was absolutely insane. So, which philosophy is actually better? Goku's UI or Vegeta's UE? Vote below and subscribe.